Have you ever felt like you're walking through life on autopilot? Like you're doing everything you're supposed to, going to school, getting a job, maybe even finding a partner. Yet something feels off. Deep down, there's a quiet ache, a restlessness you can't explain. And even though everything seems fine on the outside, you feel stuck. Not in a dramatic, falling apart kind of way, but in a slow, soul-numbing kind of way. You're not in crisis, but you're also not really living. Carl Jung believed that most people are trapped long before they realize it, not by external circumstances, but by the inner systems they've never learned to question. Beliefs they inherited, roles they were assigned, wounds they never healed. According to Jung, most of us spend our lives wearing masks, playing roles, and living out scripts that were handed to us without ever pausing to ask, whose life am I really living? Think about this. How many of your life choices were truly yours? The career you chose, was it based on your curiosity? Or based on what your parents, teachers, or culture told you was smart? The relationships you've stayed in, were they nourishing? Or were you just avoiding being alone? The habits that now shape your days, did you choose them consciously? Or did they just happen? This is the trap Jung warned us about. Not dramatic suffering, but quiet conformity. Not explosive chaos, but subtle inertia. And here's the cruel twist. The more you try to break free without understanding this inner prison, the more you stay stuck. Because freedom isn't about doing more, achieving more, chasing more. It's about becoming more conscious. Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. In other words, the parts of yourself that you ignore, the fears, the old pain, the desires you've buried, don't just disappear. They go underground. And from the shadows, they shape your actions, your emotions, your relationships. You keep repeating patterns and calling them bad luck. But really, it's your inner system crying out to be seen. Let's break this down. Most people believe that change happens through motivation, willpower, or productivity hacks. But Jung disagreed. He believed real transformation comes from integration, from facing the parts of yourself that you've rejected, denied, or never even met. He called this process individuation. It's the journey of becoming whole. It starts not with self-improvement, but with self-encounter. And that's where most people get stuck. Not because they're lazy or unmotivated, but because they're afraid to look within. Because looking within means confronting uncomfortable truths. That your career isn't aligned with your soul. That your relationship is built on emotional avoidance. That your identity is a patchwork of other people's expectations. And let's be honest, it's easier to stay busy, to scroll, to work harder, to blame others, to distract yourself with goals that don't really matter, than it is to sit in silence and ask, who am I beneath all this? That's why so many people stay stuck, because they mistake movement for transformation. But motion doesn't mean growth. You can run in circles for years. You can check every box on society's list and still feel empty inside. Here's what Jung knew. You can't truly change your life without changing the inner architecture that created it. And that means confronting what he called the shadow. The shadow is everything you've disowned in yourself. Your anger, your neediness, your insecurity, your pain. It's the parts you were told were too much, too weak, or unacceptable. So you buried them. But buried doesn't mean gone. The shadow leaks out in your reactions, in your anxiety, in your judgments of others. It's the reason you overreact to small things. It's the reason you attract the same kind of partner over and over. It's the reason you sabotage the very things you say you want. And until you face it, you'll stay stuck in the same cycles, telling yourself stories like, I guess I'm just not lucky. Maybe I'm not good enough. This is just how life is. But those aren't truths. They're survival narratives. And Jung's work wasn't about surviving. It was about awakening. So how do you begin? It starts with awareness. Real, honest awareness. Not the filtered version of yourself you show others, but the raw version that shows up when you're alone. The version that's tired of pretending, that's tired of performing, that's quietly asking for something deeper. Start by paying attention to your discomfort, your triggers, your dreams. Jung believed that our psyche speaks to us constantly, through our moods, our fantasies, even our symptoms. But most of us are too distracted to hear it. Begin journaling, not just what happened, but what you felt. What patterns do you notice? Pay attention to what drains you versus what energizes you. Notice when your reactions are bigger than the situation, and ask yourself, what am I really afraid of here? This is shadow work, and it's not glamorous. It doesn't happen on a weekend retreat. It happens in the quiet moments, in the space between stimulus and response, in the courage to feel what you've been avoiding. And as you begin this journey, something subtle begins to shift. You stop blaming others. You stop outsourcing your power. You begin to reclaim pieces of yourself that you lost along the way. And slowly, you begin to move again. Not just forward, but inward. You begin to live from the inside out, not from fear, but from clarity. You stop chasing a life that looks good and start creating a life that feels true. Because here's the deepest truth. You're not stuck because you're broken. You're stuck because your soul is asking you to evolve. And that evolution begins the moment you turn inward, not to fix yourself, but to finally meet yourself. As Jung said, who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakens. And that awakening isn't always gentle. It can shake your identity. It can shatter your illusions. But what it gives you in return is priceless. Wholeness. Not perfection, not certainty, but wholeness. And from that place, you don't just change your life. You become your life. You've probably heard the phrase, be yourself. But what if you don't really know who that is? Carl Jung believed that the self we present to the world is not our true self. It's a carefully constructed mask, a social persona, a role we've been trained to play to survive in society, gain approval, and avoid rejection. But here's the catch. The longer you wear the mask, the more disconnected you become from who you truly are. You start to believe the role, and you forget the actor. Maybe you're the responsible one, the nice one, the overachiever, the peacemaker. These roles may have helped you feel safe or accepted at one point, but now they trap you. Because if you're always playing a role, then who's living your life? Jung warned us that the danger isn't just in pretending. The real danger is in forgetting that we're pretending. You become so good at keeping the peace, you forget how to speak your truth. You become so used to being strong, you forget how to ask for help. You become so committed to being likable, you forget how to be real. And little by little, you lose the thread of your own soul. That's why so many people feel empty, even when their lives look successful on paper. They've achieved the dream, but it was someone else's dream. They've built a life, but not on their own blueprint. And the body knows, the soul knows. That's why there's anxiety, burnout, numbness. That's why joy feels fleeting, and rest feels impossible. Because the persona isn't designed to nourish you, it's designed to protect you. But protection is not the same as fulfillment. Jung taught that growth begins when we dare to question the mask. When we ask, who am I beneath this identity? What do I actually want, not what's expected of me? What parts of myself have I silenced to be accepted? These questions are not comfortable. In fact, they often bring up grief. Grief for the parts of ourselves we abandoned just to survive. But grief is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign that your real self is awakening. Let's get practical. How do these masks form? It starts early. Maybe you were praised for being quiet, so you learned to hide your opinions. Maybe you were scolded for being too much, so you dimmed your light. Maybe you were the child who kept the family together, so you became the adult who fixes everything. These patterns don't happen by accident. They're survival strategies. But what helps you survive childhood can sabotage you in adulthood. The people-pleaser can't set boundaries. The overachiever can't rest. The caregiver forgets how to receive love. And society reinforces these masks. Social media rewards performance. Corporate culture rewards burnout. Relationships reward compliance. But Jung didn't believe in living a safe life. He believed in living a real one. He said, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Not who your parents wanted. Not who your culture trained. Not who your ego constructed. But the raw, whole, radiant self underneath all of that. And here's the paradox. The more you cling to your mask, the more fragile you become. Because masks are rigid. They can't adapt. They crack under pressure. But when you begin to live from your authentic self, you become flexible, resilient, grounded. You no longer need to prove. You simply show up. You no longer seek validation. You know your worth. You no longer hustle for connection. You cultivate it. Of course, this isn't easy, because authenticity comes with a cost. You might outgrow relationships where you could only exist in fragments. You might be misunderstood by people who only knew the mask. You might feel lonely before you feel free. But freedom is worth it. Because once you taste what it feels like to live in alignment with your soul, you'll never trade that for superficial acceptance again. You'll stop asking, do they like me? And start asking, do I feel like myself in this space? That's the shift, and it's not loud or dramatic. Sometimes it starts with tiny moments. You say no without over-explaining. You take a break before your body forces one. You tell the truth, even when your voice shakes. You choose rest over perfection. You choose yourself, not out of selfishness, but out of self-respect. Jung believed that these small acts of authenticity were sacred, because they're not just personal choices, they're acts of psychological revolution. In a world that profits off your self-doubt, choosing self-trust is radical. In a culture that rewards conformity, choosing inner truth is courageous. And in a life full of noise, choosing to listen inward is the beginning of real wisdom. So here's the invitation. Start noticing when you're wearing the mask. Not to judge yourself, but to become aware. When you smile but feel numb. When you agree but want to scream. When you say, I'm fine, but you're not. These are not failures. They're clues. Clues that your soul is knocking. Clues that you're ready to remember who you were before the world told you who to be. And from that remembering, you begin to reconnect with your passion, with your intuition, with your aliveness. You begin to live, not for applause, but for truth. You begin to measure success, not by perfection, but by presence. And you begin to reclaim the one thing no mask can give you. Peace. Not the peace of avoidance, but the peace of wholeness. A peace that doesn't come from escaping your shadow, but from embracing it. A peace that doesn't require external permission, but flows from inner integration. As Jung reminds us, you are not what happened to you. You are what you choose to become. And the moment you take off the mask, the becoming begins. There's a silent war happening inside many people, not the kind that shows up in obvious ways, but a deep, unspoken conflict between the parts of themselves they accept and the parts they deny. Carl Jung called this the battle between the ego and the shadow. The ego wants control, certainty, validation. It's the story you tell yourself about who you are. Competent, logical, kind, in control. The shadow is everything the ego disowns. Your jealousy, your insecurity, your fears, your rage. But here's the truth. What you reject doesn't disappear. It waits. And if you don't face it, it shows up in the people around you. That's projection. You don't see things as they are. You see them as you are, filtered through your unhealed pain. You accuse others of being controlling, when it's your own fear of being powerless. You call someone selfish, when deep down, you've never given yourself permission to put your needs first. You lash out at someone's freedom, not because they're wrong, but because it reminds you of the freedom you've denied yourself. Jung said, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. But only if we're willing to look. Most people aren't, because it's easier to blame than to examine. It's easier to say, they're toxic, than to ask, why do I keep attracting the same dynamic? It's easier to call your boss a narcissist than to wonder why you've never learned to set boundaries. It's easier to see your partner as the problem than to question the patterns you brought into the relationship. But if you don't do the inner work, the outer world becomes your mirror. And that mirror doesn't lie. It shows you your wounds through repeated experiences. It shows you your beliefs through the people you choose. It shows you your unfinished business through every trigger you try to avoid. This is why life can feel like déjà vu. Why the same themes keep showing up. Different faces, same pain. Because until you integrate the shadow, you will be ruled by it. And here's the kicker. The shadow doesn't just hold your pain. It also holds your power, your creativity, your assertiveness, your sensuality, your fire. It all lives there too. But to access that, you have to stop pretending. Pretending you're always fine. Pretending you're above it all. Pretending your past didn't shape you. Pretending you've healed when you've only suppressed. That's not strength. That's spiritual bypassing. True healing begins when you stop editing your humanity. When you say, yes, I'm afraid, and I'm still choosing to show up. When you say, yes, I've made mistakes, and I'm still worthy of love. When you say, yes, I carry wounds, but I will no longer use them to hurt others or myself. That's integration. That's maturity. That's self-mastery. But we live in a culture that doesn't reward this. It rewards image over truth, performance over presence, control over connection. Social media teaches you to curate yourself, to highlight your strengths, hide your weaknesses, and filter out your pain. But Jung reminds us, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. So many people feel stuck because they're fighting battles they don't even know they're in. They're angry, but don't know why. They're tired, but can't rest. They crave love, but sabotage intimacy. Because the real war is inside, between the self they were told to be and the self that's screaming to be heard. Between the child who never felt safe and the adult who doesn't know how to trust. Between the desire for freedom and the fear of abandonment. If this is you, pause. Take a breath. You're not broken. You're waking up. And waking up hurts because you start to see the cost of your coping mechanisms, the friendships that were built on people-pleasing, the jobs you chose to feel worthy, the relationships you stayed in to avoid being alone, the masks you wore just to feel normal. And suddenly, the life you built feels too small for who you're becoming. That's the threshold. That moment when your discomfort with pretending becomes greater than your fear of being real. You start saying no to what drains you. You start saying yes to what heals you. You stop explaining your value. You start embodying it. This isn't the glamorous part of transformation. It's the messy middle, where you grieve old identities, where you feel lost before you feel found, where you question everything you once believed. But that's exactly where power returns, because you stop outsourcing your truth. You stop performing for love. You stop blaming the world for your suffering, and you begin to reclaim your life, not as a reaction, but as a conscious choice. Jung didn't offer easy answers. He offered an invitation to turn inward, to become intimate with your pain, to see every trigger as a teacher, to meet every judgment with curiosity, to look in the mirror and say, this is where I begin. So if life feels chaotic, if the same lessons keep circling back, if your inner voice is getting louder, don't ignore it. Lean in. The world doesn't need more perfectly curated versions of you. It needs your truth, your depth, your wholeness, because the more you own your shadow, the less control it has over you. And the more power you reclaim from it, the more alive you become. There comes a moment in every inner journey where something strange begins to happen. You've done the work. You've journaled your pain. You've confronted your past. You've unlearned the lies. You've even cut the cords to what no longer serves you. And yet, the very thing you desire, love, peace, clarity, freedom, remains just out of reach. No matter how much you strive, heal, or hustle for it, it slips through your fingers like water. This is where most people panic. They tighten their grip. They look for the next ritual, the next book, the next coach, the next breakthrough. Because surely, something is missing, right? But Carl Jung warned us about this trap. He knew that transformation isn't linear, that the path to wholeness often loops back into confusion, and that the greatest spiritual paradox is this: you receive what you need the moment you stop needing it. Not because you've given up, but because you've finally let go. Let go of control. Let go of forcing. Let go of the belief that your worth is something you have to earn through struggle. Let go of your obsession with results. Because here's the secret. You don't manifest peace by chasing it. You don't attract love by begging for it. You don't become powerful by pretending you're not afraid. You get there by surrendering, by stepping into a state of being, not doing. And for the ego, this feels like death. The ego wants to strive, to prove, to fix, to control. It's addicted to the illusion of progress. But the soul wants presence, stillness, trust. That's why so many people feel stuck on the edge of awakening, because they're still trying to earn their healing with effort, still trying to control the timing of their transformation, still measuring their growth by how productive their inner work feels. But true growth is not loud. It's not measurable. It doesn't always look like forward motion. Sometimes it looks like emptiness. Sometimes it looks like rest. Sometimes it looks like boredom, confusion, or doubt. But these are not failures. They are sacred pauses. Integration always comes after the breakdown. Receiving always comes after surrender. That's why Jung emphasized individuation, not perfection. The goal was never to become flawless. It was to become whole, to own every part of yourself, not just the polished ones, to embody your truth, even when it's inconvenient, to love yourself, even when you feel unworthy. Because healing is not about fixing the shadow. It's about making room for it at the table. And when you finally stop trying to become someone and simply allow yourself to be, something magical happens. The resistance dissolves, the chase ends, and everything you were forcing starts to flow. Because the universe doesn't respond to your words, it responds to your frequency. And when your frequency shifts from lack to presence, from fear to faith, from scarcity to surrender, everything changes. You stop needing people to validate you. You stop chasing outcomes that exhaust you. You stop measuring your worth by how much you can do or how fast you can heal. And instead, you begin to trust that who you are is enough, that the right path will unfold, that what's meant for you cannot miss you. But this trust isn't blind. It's built on evidence, the quiet proof that every time you've let go, something better has emerged, that every time you've surrendered, clarity found you, that every time you stopped forcing, grace arrived. This is the great paradox of inner work. The moment you stop striving, you start arriving. The moment you stop asking, when will it happen, is the moment you become available for it to happen, because you've shifted out of resistance and into alignment. And this is where life begins to feel different, not because you've achieved something, but because you're finally allowing yourself to receive. And not just receive outcomes, but receive rest, receive peace, receive joy, receive love, not the desperate kind, but the grounded kind that flows without demand. Receive yourself, Jung said. Your visions will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakes. You were never meant to live on a treadmill of becoming. You were meant to come home to the truth that nothing was ever missing. And now that you've stopped trying to outrun yourself, you can finally receive the life that was waiting for you all along. So if you're here now, standing at the threshold between effort and surrender, take the leap. Trust the quiet voice within. Let go of the timeline. Stop performing. Start receiving. Because the moment you stop trying to grasp the future is the moment the present begins to hold you. And that is where the real magic lives.